Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. This is your host, and tonight your presenter, Moshe Norman from Lakewood, New Jersey. Going to be talking tonight about some challenges in marital relationships and perhaps some antidotes or solutions to some of those challenges. Uh, Once a year or so, I decide to give myself a little platform and share some of my own thoughts on this platform. And I hope you enjoy. And, really, I would love to have some open discussion tonight. I'm not 100% sure whether I'll actually be sharing this publicly or not. Well, I'll decide afterwards. But certainly did want to share some thoughts on marital relationships, and really especially as it pertains to attachment and the attachment process. A little bit more about that soon. So thank you for joining, and thank you for turning on your videos for those of you who can. I'm actually honored, when people come on and it's myself presenting. I know that it's in my own merit and not in the merit of the presenter, which is rare and very touching for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the claps, the applause. So again, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. I'm just going to share a few thoughts. I don't think we'll take the full 75-minute time frame, but let me share a few thoughts on challenges. And of course, before I do, I would like to remind you that tonight's show is sponsored by okclarity.com. okclarity.com is a great website platform for mental health professionals and other people in the helping field, the healing field, and the helping field, coaches, psychiatrists, etc., to be able to feature yourself. So basically, they host your website. On their website, they do all the back-end work, so it makes it simple for you. Instead of paying somebody thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars to create a website for you, you go on okclarity.com, they create the website for you, you just put in the information, and then you get to really promote yourself. So you can put up videos, sharing workshops, trainings, or your services that you provide, or public speaking gigs that you may be doing, or any promotion that you want to about yourself. People really get to sort of get a taste of who you are. So go take a look at okclarity.com, consider signing up and creating your own website there. And remember, if you get one client for 1 or 2 sessions, you've already paid for itself. So it's really nice opportunity. And the same applies with our other sponsor, which is OfficeStream, OfficeStreamline.com. OfficeStream is a virtual secretary. It's a secretary who will take care of all your back end stuff so that you don't have to be busy with phone calls and scheduling and all of that. And it's also a great concept because, again, for those of you who scheduling and back end work takes a couple of hours a week, you sign up with their service and you save a couple of hours a week, and right there you have 2 more clients, and that's a few $100s back in your pocket. So the service way pays for itself, assuming that you save an hour or 2 or 3 a week of back end work. So again, OfficeStreamline.com, and take a look and consider signing up for a virtual secretary service. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some observations and the concept of really its attachment in marriage. I always like to say that with all the psychoeducation out there, psychoeducation is a phenomenal, fabulous tool. It's important in treating trauma. It's important in treating anything. And it's certainly important in parenting, because with parenting, the best you can do is educate parents. And, there's this fantasy that I have that, I think all of us have, that all new parents or pre-parents should be trained in parenting. As the children grow older, they should be trained in parenting children. They should be trained in parenting teenagers. And there's so much good stuff out there. There's wonderful books. There are great programs, and there are great parenting classes. I myself, as I was having children, my wife and I spent hours and hours on phone conferences or classes or courses, weekly courses by, at the time, by somebody, Dina Friedman, and by others. I've read many parenting books, and there's a lot of common themes that run throughout. And then each one has kind of their own flavor of different pieces of advice. Do it with the child instead of telling the child to do it. It's a great piece of advice. So many nuggets of advice. But what I found, commonly, the common theme throughout parenting advice, throughout marriage courses, relationship courses, and everything that's psychoeducational is that they are limited to the psychoeducation. Okay, and so people, for instance, are taught to teach their children about unhealthy touch, about safety, or whatever other lingo that's out there to prevent child molestation, sexual molestation in children. And I think that that's great. But I think that, what the research has shown is that teaching children about unhealthy touch does little to protect them from unhealthy touch. And there's a reason, I believe that there's a reason behind it. This is my hypothesis. If anybody has anything wise to share, please do. But I firmly believe that in order for children to be protected from unhealthy touch, they need more than psychoeducation. And the reason is because when a child is, God forbid, groomed by a predator, there's a lot more happening in the process than just information. A child who feels helpless and feels like they have to comply with someone who's older than them, or a child who feels needy and is finally getting some attention. Somebody is finally paying attention to them, needing them, wanting them. Those children, for instance, will not be protected with just some education that tells them this is bad. For the very same reason that someone who has high cholesterol is not simply protected by knowing that cholesterol is bad for them. If they are at an event and they see red meat or something delicious, it's going to be very tempting, and they may just fall prey to that, right? Because the fact that we know something doesn't necessarily protect us. What I do find to be more of a truth is that children who have very very strongly connected and very strongly attached and have been imbued with a strong sense of self and self-esteem are much less vulnerable to predators. And that's because if somebody approaches them, they inherently feel connected to something greater, and the wrongness, okay, the sinfulness, and I don't necessarily mean that religiously, but the sinfulness of such an act feels inherently wrong and bad and triggering and anxiety provoking for them. And because they feel like they're connected to something greater and they feel supported, and they're not needy because they feel strongly connected and attached, they're much more likely to have the resilience to avoid and push back towards these perpetrators. I don't know how that happens, but gotta get rid of this. So that's when it comes to perpetrators of sexual abuse. And I believe this to be the case really with most, again, many mental health issues, barring biological or chemical mental health issues, which those are more arguable, not necessarily black and white, but arguable. I believe that most of our neurotic issues are rooted in poor attachment. I don't think that this is my own invention, right? But they're rooted in poor attachment. And so I believe that the antidote for many relational and psychological challenges relies in the attachment foundation that's provided to a child. With this introduction, this is kind of where I see many of the challenges in marital relationships. Okay, it's in the attachment. So think about a child who has, who's raised in a disorganized environment, or an environment with, that promotes disorganized attachment. So obviously we know from, Sue Johnson and all the research that disorganized attachment is going to create relational problems. A person might be clingy from one kind of attachment. Another kind of attachment may cause them to be avoidant attachment style, right? And they'll withdraw and not be clingy enough or needy enough for the other in the relationship. And the attachment challenges that are created in early childhood are going to be at the helm of both poor relational skills, interpersonal skills that will crop up and occur throughout their marital experience, and then the perpetuation of that, and also the choice of spouse. Okay, so people will choose their spouse based on what feels familiar to them, what feels comfortable to them, and their choice of spouse is going to be hindered by negative and poor attachment experiences and attachment skills that were cultivated throughout their lifetime. And that's why I believe that the antidote, just like I explained that the antidote to something like sexual prey or sexual vulnerability in children of sexual abuse, is that they need to feel safe and secure and connected. And this develops a certain resilience, a certain security in them, that when something bad is happening, they'll inherently know, I got to stay away, I got to push back. And what I was going to add to that was that not only that, but the predator will be able to feel out who is more vulnerable, who's less vulnerable. So a child who's very secure will probably not be hit on as much as a child who is less secure and more needy and more poorly attached. Okay. And those children will grow up to have stronger relationships and to ward off challenges like that. And of course, it doesn't only apply to sexual abuse. This applies to many other things. I learned in the EMDR course training when I took it years ago that children or people who are very, very securely attached will potentially experience traumas on a much lesser level. So if they're in a car accident, they're not going to feel as helpless when recalling the incident, and they will be more resilient in coming back from that trauma, from these, traumatic, capital T traumatic incidents that happen, or one-time events or things like that, because their internal working mechanism, their attachment to self, their attachment to others, their relationship with the environment, with danger, with threat, is just much stronger, much more resilient, and the trust in the environment is stronger. So they'll be able to bounce back from these traumatic incidents much more easily. Okay, so again, with that introduction, let's go a little bit into the marital relationship and how this applies. Okay, so much of this is the catalyst behind why I created my course called Making Your Bashert, or Making Your Soulmate, because after we find our soulmate, we then have to go and make it. It's not just enough to have found it. A successful marriage takes constant work and development. And what's beautiful about the work and development of a successful marriage is that it builds upon itself. So once we create certain understandings, the capacity to communicate in certain ways, once we practice that and we use that, we utilize that, we create a sort of mutual connection with each other. So like, there's a wonderful story for those of you who read the book All for the Boss, right? There's a wonderful story where the newlywed couple was sitting next, they went out to eat, or they went out somewhere to a lounge with their older parents or in-laws. And when they sat down, sort of not even consciously, the young couple sat down next to each other, and the older couple, the parents, sat at the two heads of the table. So the young wife, who was just married for a year, she turned to her parents and she said, "Look, my husband and I are closer than the two of you. You guys are married for 30 years. You're not very close. Look, you sit far apart from each other, and we're very close. We sit next to each other." To which the father responded, he said, "No, it's really to the contrary. Your mother and I are so close, we don't have to sit next to each other to be close. We're connected wherever we are. The two of you are still developing and building on your relationship, so you still need that security of sitting and being close with each other. So the beauty of a worked on relationship is that, the concept of thick and thin, working through thick and thin. If we work through thick and we do it successfully, then we've established a permanence to this mutual connection, to this mutual understanding that we have, which allows us more flexibility and more safety in the relationship, so that when I become upset or angry or frustrated or annoyed at my wife, she will feel less afraid and insecure in the relationship, because she knows that at our core, we're very, very deeply connected. And now I'm going through a period. I'm going through something difficult or challenging that I am taking out on her, or as we say in our language, displacing on her. So that's really the beauty of it. And I think that this is what the course that I created is really focused on. It's focused on not just psychoeducation, but actually cultivating between the couple, cultivating that safety, that vulnerability, that connection, and that openness and that ability to communicate in this way. And we actually practice it in the course. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do. So, and hear your feedback on whether you believe that this is the sort of solution to newlywed couples developing a deep, meaningful relationship and connection with each other. And I would also like to show you a demonstration of some role play videos that I did with a colleague by the name of Heather Gray. I appreciate that she was willing to do this, so that you can get a sense of what it is that the couples are doing. Okay, so one of the things that we do actually on the more psychoeducational arena is dispelling myths. So there's a couple of myths that we dispel right at the get-go, at the beginning of the course. And those myths, or at least some of those myths, are as follows. Number one, if you would spend more time with your spouse, with your phone off, me and you time, let's go out, once a week or twice a month and sit and eat together, turn off your phone, spend just me and you time gazing at each other, talking to each other, and having deep, meaningful conversations with each other. That is the answer, and that will solve 90% of your marriage problems. This is something that I did here in a course. I made up the 90% part, but this is something that I did here in a course that's a necessity, and this really will resolve all problems. And part of why today's young couples are having such challenges is because they're so distracted by technology, etc. So it's a nice point, but I don't believe that it's the answer. I think that it's a myth, and here's why. Because if you and I as a couple have a strained relationship in the way we communicate with each other, we feel defensive, we feel unsafe, partly, potentially, and very likely because our attachment styles are haven't been strengthened or are poor, then sitting together for 2 hours twice a month is going to perpetuate more of that negative interaction. So now I've turned off my phone. I have no computer, no laptop. I have no access to the outside world. And you and I are isolated in a room or in a restaurant together in a booth. And what do? I share something. Your attachment skill is not so strong. You feel defensive and you attack because you get offensive. Why are you saying that? Why are you saying that about me? And I can't share my feelings with you. So what did we help by putting the couple in a room together with each other without having the skills that they need to feel safe with each other? So I don't believe that that's the answer. Then there's the giving in to your spouse, or relinquishing control, giving in. Doing what you're, always giving into your spouse will make your spouse happy. And if you make your spouse happy by always giving into them, then they will want to please you and they'll want to make you happy. Okay, there is such an approach out there. I don't believe that that's the case. I think that spouses who cannot be truthful and open with each other will not be able to be successful. One will always be the underdog, and as much as they may buy into the belief that that's going to work, they are going to begin to feel resentful, and that resentment is going to manifest itself in many maladaptive and destructive ways. So even though they may believe in this and they may convince themselves that this is something that's helpful, but the underlying resentment that will build because I have to always give in or be mevater or make you feel special because that's going to come back to get, to improve my life, is not going to work. It's going to create that anger and resentment, which will manifest in one of many different ways. And it's also not going to work because the spouse who is being enabled is not going to feel safe and comfortable and happy either. Because if I, as a spouse, can't look at you and say, this makes me feel good, this doesn't make me feel so good, can you do this, can you stop that? If I can't request that from you in a very assertive, meaningful, purposeful way, then you don't feel like an equal in the relationship. You feel like I'm a wimp in the relationship. You don't feel like you can properly provide to me. And people, let's face it, most people feel good when they're able to provide for another person, not only when they take from another person. So if all I'm doing in the relationship is taking and taking, it maybe feeding my narcissistic needs, I may feel some sense of calm, or some sense, it may gratify some of the anxious parts of me, but the relational parts of me that are craving for affection, connection, are not being met because the other person, my spouse in the relationship, cannot be open, honest, true, and vulnerable. So giving into your spouse is not the answer to a happy relationship. Okay. And again, I'm happy to hear other opinions on this. Okay. Here's another one that I added, another myth that I added to my list of dispelling myths. And that is, the problem is that my wife spends too much time on the phone with her mother. She's too connected and attached to her mother. If she would only be more focused on me, then and let go of her mother, then our marriage would be better. Now, this is a common complaint, and there may be some truth to it. And again, this may be controversial. You may not agree with this. Again, I'd love to hear if you don't agree with that. But I believe that something greater has to happen in the relationship. A woman may be attached to her mother, or a guy to his mother, for that matter, or to his father, or to his friends, or to her friends, right? And that's something that's important and healthy, obviously, if it's not too much. But the way to change that dynamic is not by telling the spouse, spend less time with your parent or with your friends. Rather, it's by cultivating connection and love and the need for the spouses to need each other. So if my wife or your husband is spending too much time with someone else, can you develop a relationship in a way that the two of you become so close that the mother starts to fall away? If the dependent is the spouse, then by default, there will be a reduction in the amount of time, energy, and enmeshment that spouse has with their parent. So the solution to that is not tell them to stop, it's tell us to begin. Okay, that's another myth that I'd like to dispel. And again, curious to hear any feedback on that. Malcolm, you want to say something?
I would say that I would tweak that language a little bit and say to them in a much broader way that the key would be to communicate. In this case, the man who has an issue with his wife talking, doesn't matter what it is, but in that case, to communicate how they feel rather than talk about create more closeness. It doesn't feel like the right approach to me. To me, it seems as if the better way is to learn to express yourself. I feel however way the guy feels.
Mm-hmm.
And that if the woman gets defensive by him stating his needs, that's a conversation, if they're in seeing you, or could be taught between themselves, with learning almost how to be therapists together. I did not say this to criticize you. I want to learn to create a safe environment for both of us to have the third. There's you, there's me, and there's us.
Yes.
And the us thrust is to create safety for us to be able to talk intimately and openly.
Absolutely.
And that's how I would express it to them. because they need to learn the skill of saying how they feel.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think we're disagreeing. I
No.
am sharing with you that I believe that they need to cultivate closeness rather than just dictating to a spouse, you need to stop talking to your mother so much and focus on me. Why should she focus on me is the question. And the answer is if they create, I'm not telling this to them, I'm telling this to us, that if we can help them to create more closeness with each other, then by default, the enmeshments will begin to dissolve potentially.
Yeah, I'm going just a step further in saying, rather than saying don't to develop closeness, it's learn to put into words how you feel.
Exactly. And yes,
okay, I don't mean to be
that's
pedantic.
the postscript to what I'm saying is what you're saying, which is that the way that they'll develop that closeness is through sharing and vulnerability and openness. So yes, precisely that's where I'm going with this. Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that. Thank you for that input.
Sure.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? You can raise your hand by using the bottom right reactions tab on the screen, or you can just unmute. Okay. So we started off talking about the disorganized or other attachment challenges that couples bring into their relationships. And what we're looking to do now at this point is to mitigate misunderstandings that occur in relationships due to poor communication, or like Malka saying, to lack of communication, right? There's so much that we hope and wish and want in the relationship, but that we don't actually take a step forward and lean into in order to make that happen by getting vulnerable and by communicating. So many couples have said, I don't want to say that to him because I don't want to hurt his feelings. I don't want to say that to him because, like, how could I say something that doesn't sound nice about him to him or to her, right? And the truth of the matter is that if you can't say it, you can't build. And if you say it and it hurts them and they can't deal with that, then that needs to be addressed. And if you can say it properly, then usually they'll be able to hear it and accept it. And even more so, one of the primary skills that we learn that's addressed in this workshop for couples that they do together is mutual understanding. So they actually share with each other that I want you to understand that when I fill in the blank, criticize you, if they first identify something that they do or that their spouse does, they write it down on a piece of paper and they say, I want you to understand that when I yell at you or raise my voice or get snappy or criticize you or ask you to do something, it does not mean, and then they fill in the blank. It does not mean I don't respect you, I don't love you, I don't care about you, I think you're bad, I think you're stupid. It does not mean that. Rather, it means, and then they fill in the blank. I'm in a bad mood, this is triggering for me, I'm hungry, tired, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the couple actually practices sharing with each other. I want you to understand when I do this, this is not what it means, and this is what it means. Can you understand that? And then the person expresses that they understand that, and then they get to say something. So what we're doing is we're practicing the skill of mutual understanding. That's one skill that we learn. Okay. Seems to be a great fear of validating. I see this with parents to their children and with couples and just in general interpersonal styles. People seem to be afraid to validate, especially when the complaint is against the person themselves. But even not, there is this notion or this idea out there that if I validate, I'm going to make it worse. If I validate their anger or their complaint towards their teacher, then they're going to have real beef, because even my mother said that my teacher is wrong. If there seems to be this notion that validation makes things worse and people are afraid to validate. So in the course, we do a lot of practice on validation. Again, I don't just teach validation because that's psychoeducational, but I have the couple learn how to hold each other when they come with a complaint. I'm going to show you a couple of demonstrations of that. So one step, level one is they learn how to validate each other. So each spouse takes a turn complaining about something. First, they do it scripted. So the wife complains that she was in the grocery, somebody cut her off online and just took over her spot. The husband complains that he went to the mechanic who promised them the car's going to be ready at 1 o'clock, and he came at 1:15 and it wasn't even started. And they practice validating each other by learning the validation words, which really are 2 or 3 words. That's frustrating. That's so frustrating. That's really annoying. Okay, they just learn how to validate, and then they learn how to hold by reflecting, using reflection, and they practice that skill. And then after that, I incorporated something even better, which I call emotional holding, stepping it up, or validation, stepping it up. And I have the spouses each identify something that they find imperfect about their spouse, something that they wish were different, or that they wish they would do differently, something they're concerned about or worried about or afraid of. And each spouse writes that down. And then they share that after they've practiced validating and holding each other. They practice sharing the stepping it up, which is, I'm going to now complain about something about you. And they share something about the spouse that they wish they would do differently or wish would be different. And they practice then holding and validating. And it's very, very scary for many people because, again, if they acknowledge their spouse's feelings, if I acknowledge my wife's complaint about me, I am stripping myself. I'm becoming vulnerable and I'm saying, I'm bad. You're good and I'm bad. And that makes me feel terrified. This is how many people experience it. But after we do the emotional experience of emotional holding, of validation, before the stepping it up, I ask the couple, how did it feel to share that with your spouse? And how did it feel to be heard? And they start to get that feeling validated is a great feeling. And not only doesn't it make the other person incriminated, but to the contrary, I actually respect you more when you're able to hold me when I'm feeling stressed out. So I went to the mechanic, the car wasn't ready. I come home to you, I complain. You want to make me feel better. So you say, oh, come on, he wasn't able to, he promised, he didn't mean to promise you, he just was saying, right? You want to make me feel better. But the more you say that to me, the more frustrated I feel, the more annoyed I am at the mechanic, and the more annoyed I start to feel towards you. But when you said to me, oh, that's so frustrating, and then it messed up your whole day because you had everything planned out and you were supposed to be by the doctor at 1:30 and you came at 1:15, the car wasn't ready and he promised it would be, and then how you supposed to, oh my gosh, right? So you're giving me the space. Obviously, we all know how validation works. You're giving me the space to have those feelings. I feel better and I like you better. I feel more close and more connected to you. And I would say certainly so. If I learn that you're safe enough, that when I complain about you, you could hold that. Now you're really safe. It's much easier to do this on something that's innocuous. But if I could complain about you and you could come clean in holding me or in fessing up if you in fact did something wrong. But even if you're not doing something wrong, it's just something that I don't prefer. And you can be okay with that. And you can hold me. I've learned for now and forever that you are safe and I can open up to you. And when something's truly disturbing me, whether it's about you or something else, I can share that with you. And how can one feel more attached to their spouse than knowing that whatever comes up and whatever they're struggling with, they're safe to share and they'll feel supported. Okay? And this is the concept behind the course. We're cultivating it. And the same thing with defensiveness, right? Another thing that I have here is defensiveness. I'd rather get defensive. My wife complains to me, I said something to you yesterday and your response was so flippant, right? So I'll get defensive. There's 2 reasons people will get defensive. Either because they have to save face. They can't admit that they did something wrong. Because they're afraid for whatever reason. They're either afraid that it's going to ruin the relationship, or their own narcissistic wounds, are afraid to be wrong. Or another reason that people will become defensive is because they think that it will make the other person feel better. My wife complains to me that I didn't listen to her while I say, no, you're not understanding. I was actually listening to you very well, and that's why I said that thing. So I'm trying to calm the situation by being defensive. And of course, it's creating more chaos and more stress, more distress in the relationship. Okay, so that's the reason that people that people become defensive. And again, with these skills cultivated of being able to make tons of space and hold the spouse, my hope is that they will become more connected and attached. Okay, any questions or comments on that? I'm going to go look for my videos that I want to pull up so that I can show a couple of videos to you on this idea.
Could I just add that it would be good to phrase it to them rather than attacking, this is what you're doing that's annoying me, to rather keep it at, I am triggered. You see, I get triggered when you go off on tangents. And it's a Langamaisa that could have been a simple, I get triggered.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a very valuable approach? Because again, how you're sharing it with us may not be exactly how you're sharing it with them, but I have found I'm working with a couple now that they're both survived the screaming and the Michigan behavior. So I'm very tuned in now, because even though I've done this for 100 years, you always have to learn.
This is a great idea for me to incorporate. Once they're already doing exercise, I may as well script it better.
Yeah.
I feel upset for anyone. Thank you for that. Great idea. Yeah, the focus wasn't so much on the language that they use. It was on the technique, but may as well, like you said, add this language. Okay, here is the basic holding technique, the basic validation, and in the not the stepping it up one.
I have to talk to you about this, Moshe. I am so frustrated right now. I just got back from Gourmet Glad, and I'm in the checkout line, and all of a sudden, this woman with a screaming baby jumps right in front of me as I'm unloading my stuff and says, "Would you mind? I'm sorry, my baby needs to get out of here right now." And she's got a cart a mile high. Like, can you believe these people? The chutzpah? Has she absolutely no thought or consideration, or is it just because she has a baby
That's
that
crazy.
she thinks, oh my gosh, what is that?
First of all, you were there standing there before her. She can't just insert herself. At best, she should be asking permission. And second of all, how does she know that you don't have your own circumstances that you're in?
Sense of entitlement? Where does that come from? Can you believe that?
It's a good example where Heather comes in and she's showing a lot of emotion. She's showing that she's upset and frustrated and annoyed. And there's so many other responses I could give because she may be wrong. She may have been able to see some other perspective. And instead, what I do is in the moment, I want to be there to hold her. To hold her makes her feel that she has a right to have these feelings. It makes her feel connected with me. It makes her feel understood. And that will calm her down. Here's an alternative that I could have said. I mean, Heather, you see that she has a baby. I mean, I get that you were there first, but you see that she has a baby and she's probably very, very overwhelmed and maybe she's in a rush. I mean, sometimes it might be nice to just, expand your perspective and, maybe be down the cuffs or, if you have that time to let somebody go in front of you. Yes, that was our basic holding technique. I show this to the couples so they could get a sense of what it looks like to do just basic holding. And now I would like to do the step it up one. I think it's this one. Hang on.
When we first got married, I really thought that you were much firmer than you are. In reality, I never see you daven. You hardly walk into shul. And when you do, it's for under 10 minutes. How could you even have time to put on your tefillin? You never wear your tzitzis. Well, okay, wait, let me stop. You occasionally wear your tzitzis. And when you do, it's only because you're really afraid of me. Not because you really want to. We got so many beautiful svarim for our wedding and engagement. I have never, not one time, ever seen you open up a book.
Heather, I think you're making some good points, you know, and I understand why it's so upsetting for you. When we got married, you were obviously expecting somebody who's a lot more frum and a lot more into some of these halachos and lifestyle that you're describing. And at the end of the day, I'm not really fully like that. I mean, I do keep to some things, and I think that I'm spiritual. But I could see why this is really, really devastating, because you had a vision of something so much more than that. And, you know, that's devastating for you. So this is the example of the stepping it up, where rather than becoming defensive or pouting and becoming offensive or pouting and withdrawing, I allow her the space to be disappointed. And I share with her my understanding of how devastating it is to have had dreams that went unfulfilled and were, you know, life dreams that were devastated. And again, this is how we demonstrate that. Okay, Razy, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like realistically, I don't know how realistic it is such a thing to happen. Like I'm saying, usually when a spouse will say something like this to the spouse, you feel very personally attacked. Like, how realistic is it to expect the spouse to? I mean, I'm wondering, like, if she would have said it in a different way, and like, more, I don't know.
So I mean, I think that it really depends on the person's sense of self, how secure a person is, or how they learn how to connect with each other in a way that spouses are very, very safe. And so again, this is where I'm helping them to cultivate that sense of safety, so that a conversation like this that takes place in 5 years or 10 years from now can be very, very open. You know, you'll have spouses who say, I share everything with my spouse, right? And they just feel very safe doing so. They feel very held and supported. So if they have strong attachment skills or a sense of self, then they will be able to accept and tolerate it, because any alternative response is only going to create more tension and more devastation. So now, if I would have said to Heather, if I would have responded in a defensive way, you know, you should have known, I was pretty clear about it, blah, 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 right? Then I would actually be creating, not only would Heather be devastated that she doesn't have a more religious spouse, but she's going to be doubly devastated that she has a defensive and unsupportive spouse. This way, she may be devastated that she has an unlearned or not so religious spouse, but she's going to be very proud and very comfortable and very fortunate, feel very fortunate that she has a very supportive spouse who at least understands her and gives her that.
It's funny because no, there was just over Shavuos, there was a story like exactly like this in the mishpacha, and they claimed it was a true story, where the wife also was, you know, very upset that he wasn't learning. She, you know, she knew she was marrying a working boy, but her father always made time to learn, and you know, and she ended up telling her husband that, you know, she wants to go, and he was otherwise like a great father, and he like about parnasa, like it wasn't like she, you know, and she like wanted to go to therapy, and in therapy the husband ended up saying that he had a learning disability and he has no idea how to read Gemara. She used to catch him with his chavrusa that was once a day, and like he wasn't learning, and he ended up telling her that he really doesn't know how to learn, you know.
Stories in these papers are just that, you know, they're
They claimed it was true, but
even things that are true are not true when you read these stories.
right, but
So again,
Right.
you're asking a question, and I think the answer is we could do our best. My argument that I've been making the whole time is that we don't want to just psychoeducate couples. We want to actually help them to cultivate that attachment with each other, and that's exactly what the goal is and what we're trying to do. So will it work? Will it not work? I think we have a better shot at it working if we try to cultivate it than if we don't.
Right.
Hey, Sherry, go ahead.
I think the ideas are wonderful, but I think you have to teach defensiveness. Meaning you have to teach that the first reaction might be defensive. What will I feel like in the body, first of all, so they recognize it, so they can calm it down. Then they can do the doubling and they can do the validation. But I think they need to know that it is normal to feel,
Well, we actually do the exercise in the class, meaning they bring up something that they're disappointed about or they wish were different, and then I ask the couple, how did it feel to hear that? And each couple has to put into the chat box how it felt to hear that. So assuming that they're being honest, we can try to get as close to that as possible. But that's a nice idea to teach them defensiveness.
and literally to teach them also how that feels in the body, so they can be aware, because once they're aware of that, they can calm themselves down, and you could teach them how to calm themselves down too, and then go to
Feeling
the
that after tonight's discussion, my 5-week workshop for couples is going to turn into a 10-week workshop for couples. Okay, Tia, thank you, Sherry. Great idea.
I love that one of your myths is dispelling the empowered wife garbage.
Did I say something about that?
I think you did.
And
then the one
full
afterwards.
disclaimer, I never read the book, so you can't can't claim.
Good. But the other example you gave after that was also very similar. Basically, just not using
Meshman with
gratuitous ways to express something, but rather to actually express yourself.
Right. I was setting it up. I was setting you up for sort of what Malka was saying, which is I was setting it up that the key here is the connection and the attachment with the spouse, and much else will fall away when that's again like if my spouse and I are very deeply connected, and my spouse asks me to not leave my socks on the floor, I'm going to do it just to honor her, right? It's if there's something about the being connected that is going to mitigate so many of the other things, because we care about each other. We're very deeply connected. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think so too. And I think the validation is that connection. I'm wondering if in the course, if you find that certain people are more triggered, let's say, by the sharing part, I don't know how you would what you label that, sharing a complaint. How did you label it? So I can use your.
I don't remember.
Yeah, sharing a comment, a critique. I don't know how you want to say it.
Or whatever.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you gently explain, like, as I think someone else suggested, like that if you're telling them to notice how they feel in their body when they hear something, if you would then gently suggest that anybody who really has a hard time with that portion might want to seek individual counseling.
So yes,
I agree. I don't think that I don't think many spouses could have handled the critique of husband's, religiosity so gracefully. I think that was a tough one. Socks on the floor after lots of validation all day long, great. But
so I would say I will say that there have been couples in the course who struggled specifically with this. Everybody seems to struggle with the concept of validation. I think I have it down to a science in the way I understand it, but people struggle with it all the time. Like I could teach validation for 5 hours and then have parents practice it on their child, and they'll come back and say, I said to my child, I see that's upsetting for you, which is not validation. It's not validating in any way whatsoever, right? And I will even tell them beforehand, don't say I see that it's upsetting for you, because you're not validating them, you're only making an observation. And they'll just say, duh, it's upsetting for me, and stop talking like a therapist. But when they complain about something, you just say, I take validation is 2 simple words. That's frustrating. That's upsetting. On cue. When they say, you say, that's upsetting. And then if you want to enhance it and you have a good memory and you can remember 3 words, you say, that's so upsetting, or that's really upsetting, or that's very upsetting. right? That's it.
Right.
It's those two words. It's the attitude and the inflection and all that stuff that's validating. Not I see that you're upset. That doesn't validate. So I find that the biggest challenge, again, there is a percentage of couples that have a hard time with validating, but they can learn it. But there's another percentage of couples that has a very hard time allowing themselves to be vulnerable in this way, where their spouse can share something and they'll talk about how they're hurt, etc., etc. And then, I'll have them perhaps share with their spouse that they feel hurt. That's because I say to them, how did it feel to you? And someone said, I felt hurt and it didn't feel right to do it. And I say, let's try sharing that with your spouse and then use emotional holding. Right? When you say I felt hurt, your spouse can use emotional holding to hold you back. But another point that I should make here is that I screen most couples who come to make sure that they're not experiencing marital distress. This is not a course. You cannot give a public course with 10 couples and include a couple that's already engaged in a negative interpersonal pattern, relational pattern that's already fighting, already in a negative pattern. It's really for couples who are happy for the most part, who are complacent, content with each other. Those couples are the ones who are joining. The other ones are going to need much more individualized work. And then you're going to have some of these couples who seem to be happy, but are going to struggle with some of these exercises. And I might give them some time over the course of the week, a few minutes to sort of try to straighten that out. Yeah. So, the greater percent of the couples are very, very, very happy with the ideas. And then you have some who struggle. Of course, I'm not screening these people out in person, so I can't detect if someone is Asperger's and doesn't really have this interpersonal skills. Some of those are going to fall through the cracks.
Right, or they may be perfectly happy because no one deigned to ever criticize the other one yet, and they're walking on eggshells, but they would describe themselves as happy.
I once asked whether people
Until you come into the picture and ask them to do something they've never done.
are like, what? And I make problems, right? Okay, Yechana. Did you want to say something? You're unmuted. No?
I am unmuted. I just sent you.
Now you have to say something.
I sent you a message that my last minion for my neighborhood is at 10 o'clock, so I'm running. Number one. Number two, but there are.
I have to move to Lakewood, by the way.
I have to go to Lakewood. Mr. Show, we'll get
Don't have that problem.
It seems that everybody's getting there. Anyways, there are some things that are like in the example, the second example that you gave, which is for sure much more extreme. At that point, there is some connection that's already shot. It's already lost. When somebody's disappointed in what a spouse and who the spouse is, not in what they do or not how they react, there is already a disconnect, a divide. I would tend to think. So like validation is great when we could start with a good connection and we want to be connected and we want to be good. But when I'm disappointed in you, like that's already a step further away. Is that just like validation? How far does it get you? Like what's the next step after that?
So one of the skills that we learn, that we practice, is called mutual commitment. And I'm going to, I guess it's Me'inyan Baisi. I don't know if this will directly answer your question, but it'll give you a sense that there's more to the course. There's something called mutual commitment, which means that, and I get if you have to go, then run out. But that means that I've now explained to you that when I rage and scream at you, it's not because I disrespect you or I don't love you or I don't care about you. It's just that there's certain things that are triggers for me. And when those things happen, that's my reaction. It's like when someone tickles me, I laugh, right? So, okay, we created that mutual understanding about each other. But now there's something called mutual commitment. So, Yechanan, you rage at me every time you get triggered, and you get triggered twice a week, right? So do I have to put up with that now forever? Right? So now I have to be the subject of your raging and getting yelled at and destroyed, even though I know you don't mean it. It still doesn't feel very good. Can we come up with a commitment to a plan? And then we'll do collaborative problem solving and come up with a plan as to what that looks like. I actually have another shot with Heather on that. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
I think it's right here. Let me see if this is it. I know I get you have to go, but for the other people, let's take a look at how Heather and I do this. Hear your thoughts.
Moshe, I really want you to remember and to understand that above all, I really deeply, deeply respect you. And I'm bringing this to you now because I recognize that sometimes I yell or I snap at you when I'm really stressed out, like I did last night. I feel really badly about it. But and I'm going to work on that, but what I really want you to remember, and this is important for me, is that above all, I really respect you and I care about you no matter what. Even at times when I get lost.
Well, I appreciate that. So this is an example of mutual understanding. How what Heather is doing for me right now is she's helping me to understand what her prevailing feeling towards me is, in spite of the fact that when she behaves differently, she's explaining that that's not the way she feels about me. That's just what happens when she's triggered. Okay. And sometimes what we need to do after that is we might have to make a mutual agreement. We've created an understanding that's mutual. Now we might have to make a mutual agreement. When do we have to make a mutual agreement? Well, if the behaviors that she's doing towards me, in spite of the fact that I now understand are not out of malice or hostility, are still hurtful and need to stop. So here's my response to Heather. Heather, I appreciate it, and that's very meaningful to me. And I understand what you're saying, that sometimes you get upset and triggered. But at the same time, when you do these things to me, it's extremely hurtful because you can say some really, really nasty things that some of them might actually be true. And so they hurt me. What I'm wondering is, would we be able to come up with a plan? And I notice you going there and doing this, and I know that I'm going to get really hurt. Would you agree that I in some way remind you or stop you, and can we come up with a plan so that it doesn't have to go that far that I get really hurt?
Yeah, that would really, really help me. I would so appreciate it.
So you wouldn't mind, even though I know you're really triggered now and you need your space and you need to be able to vent and say what you have to say, you wouldn't mind if I in some way say, Heather, that's too much. Would you then agree to temper it down?
Well, if you could find words to help me slow myself down, that wouldn't feel hard in those moments to hear.
Okay, so could we do this then? How about the first time something like this happens, I'll try to stop you in whatever feels appropriate to me. And then we'll revisit this afterwards and discuss it and see if that was okay and if that worked for you.
You know what would really help me? Rather than saying something, if you could maybe touch your shoulder. And that would be a signal to me that it's getting too much.
Okay. So you feel that if I say something, it might trigger you more or further or upset you further, but if I do something that's not saying something, it'll be more subtle and you'll be able to. Okay.
Yeah, I would be able to hear that better.
Let's try that. And I really appreciate that you brought this up.
And would it be okay if I could do the same for you, and that way we could support each other?
For sure, for sure.
That would feel really nice.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so there we got a little into the theatrics there. Sorry about that. But that's the idea of mutual commitment, so that we don't just leave each other hanging with this excuse. But now that I've created this mutual understanding with you, I'm free to beat you up or beat you down. Okay, Malka, go.
Okay.
Malka's gonna be my partner in this.
I know, but this chick who let her husband have it, Heather, with her disappointment, I'm taking a different position. She needed to shut up. I would not only not validate her or encourage her, I would have done what you did the third round here with Heather. You know, when you say those things to me, it's very hurtful. I would not validate her disappointment. She was semi-abusive in her tone, in her delivery, It would be as if she said to him, you know, I married you nice and slim, and you're a fat pig now. And, you know, I'm really upset about that. That's not what I married. It's like, no, that's not an acceptable way to talk. So I think if it was in person and a wife spoke the way she did to her husband about her disappointment about him not being religious enough, like, this is not your problem, lady. You're talking about his religiosity, which is not your business. I would not only not validate her, I would have said exactly what you said to her. Third round of, sometimes when you are triggered, you go overboard and it's very painful, and you leave us unattached, distanced, and not very trustworthy as a partner. That's what she needed to hear.
Oh, okay, what does the group say? I disagree with this.
Okay, sure.
I think that it's okay for her to express the fact that she's disappointed, that she believes I portrayed myself a certain way and I'm not, and that she's living in
It was the whole
living in pain.
picture of vehemence, like guts polizei over here. Shut up. If she wanted to know what's your story, you ask it in a way that's, you know, was my impression wrong about you when we dated? You seem less spiritual and less davening and less this and less that. What's going on with it? You know, did I misread? Or share with me what your spiritual journey is like. I'd love to hear. Where are you at? That's a discussion that will not require him to be hurt. She is asking him, tell me what's going on in your life. Don't sit there in authority. The next week, he's going to come back and say, you know, the way you parent, what is wrong with you?
Okay, what does the group
There
say?
is where you
What-
could.
Do I need to change this? What does the group say? The survey says, come on, guys, I'm gonna